Back in 1998, CyberConnect and Bandai released a PS1 game about a police dog piloting a mech to stop sky pirate cats from stealing magic crystals to power a giant robot. What could possibly go wrong? I'm Joe, an ex-gaming industry pro, and today we're diving into a quirky, nostalgic world and reviewing Tail Concerto for the PS1. Tail Concerto takes place in the fantastical world of Prairie, where cats and dogs are at odds. You play as Waffle Rye Bread, a police dog tasked with stopping the notorious Black Cat Gang. It's a bit like a Saturday morning cartoon with a massive emphasis on steampunk. Despite its unique premise, Tail Concerto didn't make waves when it launched. It did get a spiritual successor over a decade later, and even inspired a related series in 2021. So, was Tail Concerto an underappreciated gem, or is it better left in the past? Stick around for the boss battles and you might just find your answer, but we'll cover that later. The game is a simple action adventure with some platforming. You're piloting a mech suit that lets you scoop up objects, hover and shoot bubbles, because in Prairie, capturing cat bandits is as easy as bubble wrapping them. The gameplay is fairly slow paced, with more of an emphasis on thinking rather than action, but sometimes it takes the slow and bumps it up to lethargic. The story reminds me of Dragon Quest a little. You're chasing after the Black Cat Gang, led by the rebellious Alicia, who happens to have a history with Waffle. The story doesn't take itself too seriously, with plenty of whimsical moments, though there's an unexpected, probably unintentional depth about cats and dogs at odds over the land's history. Waffle is a likeable protagonist, and while the story may be sorta generic, it could definitely be seen as heartfelt and a little silly in the best way. When I first booted up Tail Concerto, I was shown a really impressive intro that got my hopes up for what type of game this was going to be. There's this warm, nostalgic feeling, like you've stepped into a world straight out of a children's book, and then you're hit with the reality of difficult, outdated controls and gameplay that doesn't flow well. Let's start with the mech suit. This is pretty much attached to you for the entire gameplay. You can pick up objects, float for a short time, or a long time with the jetpack, and shoot bubbles to capture cats. It sounds silly, but it actually works. The levels are designed around using these abilities in fun ways, from solving small puzzles to taking down enemies. That said, the game definitely has some quirks. The controls are loose to the point where you feel like you're on ice and you have to micro adjust constantly. The camera is even worse. It has a mind of its own, except you can use it to look up and down using the back buttons, which doesn't really help anything. It's not uncommon to get stuck or miss a jump because the camera decided to do its own thing. In combat, it feels like you're maneuvering a tank rather than a nimble mech suit. You have to turn around to get a clear shot, which makes each encounter feel like an exercise in patience rather than action. And this becomes especially clear during boss battles. I mentioned earlier that these would answer the question of whether the game holds up. Well, the bosses look interesting, but fighting them is painfully slow. Each one takes ages to defeat, but not because they're challenging, just because you're repeating the same simple actions over and over. Imagine spending 10 minutes on a boss where all you do is circle around, fire bubbles, and circle around again. It's like the opposite of a Dark Souls boss. Sure, the time spent on the battle is there, but instead of intense focus, you'll be daydreaming, thinking about your old neighbour Totoro and what he's up to now. Now, there is a world to explore. Prairie has NPCs to chat with, a few hidden secrets, and a sprinkle of side activities. But the game is only about 4 hours long, and the missions get repetitive fast, with the same cat enemies popping up constantly. Wait, what the f***? is that? The difficulty is low. There's almost no challenge to the game, so if you're looking for an intense or skill-based experience, this isn't it. But for some players, that simplicity might add to its charm, especially if you're here for nostalgia or the warm world design. But overall, this is a PS1 game from 1998, CyberConnect's first ever game, I believe, so it may not have held up in my eyes, but I'm sure it was a favourite for some people back in the day. The gameplay may not have aged well, but visually, Tail Concerto has aged surprisingly well. The colourful cel-shaded graphics give it a timeless look, and the character designs are memorable and fun. I will say that my only issue is the dogs and cats look nearly identical, considering how much they hate each other, but it's part of the style, I think. The soundtrack is upbeat and lighthearted, but repetitive. Each track is simple and loops quickly. It wears thin. The voice acting, though, is surprisingly solid. Fun fact, in the English dub, Alicia is voiced by Amanda Wynn Lee.
I'm watching the enemy! Hey, don't get so close to him, you tramp!
Known for Rey in Evangelion, and Waffle by Lani Minella, the voice of Rouge the Bat. Interesting, right? What's also interesting is the story. Though simple, it has this unexpected and probably unintended depth to it. There's tension between the cats and dogs, with stories out there of the land originally being the cat's land, but the dogs came and took it over back in the past. Some cats of today consider it to be rightfully their land and consider themselves oppressed by the dogs. I don't think the developers intended the story to have those connotations, but oh boy, that's heavy. But don't worry, I keep things light, and so does Tail Concerto. The villains are more mischievous than threatening, and there's plenty of humour in the interactions.
I'm jealous of your way with a ladies' officer, Waffle. Oh, I wish I was as tall as you!
They are trying to awaken the Iron Giant, voiced by Vin Diesel and produced by what? Oh, wrong script. This Iron Giant is used for evil. Nothing like Superman. Just be prepared to turn your brain off sometimes. These three are holding the princess hostage. How is this police dog going to ever stop them, considering he's in a powerful mech and they're unarmed? Well, he gives in to their demands because he obviously couldn't stop them. There's also a scene where one of the cats is in jail, except the bars are far enough apart that you could just walk through. Not the best look, but I think I'm probably just being picky, and I'm sure a lot of people can look past things like this. So, is Tail Concerto worth revisiting today? Honestly, probably not. The controls and camera are dated, the boss fights are slow, and the levels repetitive. But if you're here for a unique, cozy world with a bit of PS1 nostalgia, it might just win you over. For those who grew up with it or are into retro gaming, Tail Concerto has a charm to it, and if you're curious, there's always its modern counterpart, Fuga, Melodies of Steel. If you enjoyed this review and want to see more niche retro games, hit that like button and subscribe. As always, have a good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, whenever you are, and tune in next week for a storm of bullets.